Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. Jason is engineering the broadcast at Genesis Communications Network in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. Rich Sheben's with us. Welcome, Rich Scheben.
Well, thank you, Vincent Finelli. How are you doing this morning?
Well, I'm doing well. I wanted to share with you something that I heard. We have never, ever talked about it. We haven't even had a subject that came close to this. But I got a call from a friend of ours, friend of mine. He is a broadcaster. He's on another network. I'll even mention the network, Republic Broadcasting Network. He has invited me to be on the air with him. I have been on the air with him and another broadcaster on Republic Broadcasting. They'll call me up and say, hey, would you come on with us? And, if I can, I'll do that. And that's usually in an evening. And so he mentioned a situation. So this guy, my friend, is a broadcaster. He has a radio show. It's quite excellent. And let me set the stage. So, at USA Prepares, Genesis Communications Network and Republic Broadcasting Network are in charge of whether we air or not. Okay? I serve at their pleasure. But, they run the clock, they run the time slot, and they run their commercials. Other than that, I'm in charge of everything else. So I'm in charge of who's on the air. I'm in charge of the brand, the protocol, the language, the content, the instructors. And that's how we run USA Prepares. Well, sometimes I'm unable to be on the air. Something happens at the farm. For whatever reason, I may not be able to be on the air. So what I'll do is I'll make a decision. Do we want to run a rerun? We could have technical difficulties, whatever it is. Do we run a rerun, which I'd rather not do, or do we have a live guest host? And that live guest host is someone I trust. That could be a Rich Scheben, it could be Captain John Regan, it could be Guineith Isaacs, it could be one of our trusted, loyal instructors. And the reason I'm careful about who I select or invite or ask to be on the air as a guest host is I want to make sure that they don't blow up the broadcast. Someone who won't use profanity, won't get us fined by the FCC, cause us to lose our affiliate radio stations. Okay? Makes sense, right? Are you okay with what I've said so far, Scheben?
Well, sure.
Okay. So my friend was unable to make a broadcast. And he's in one of those professions where if he makes a mistake, someone could die. Literally, no question about it, within minutes, if he made a mistake. So he is attentive to all details by his profession, as well as on the radio. So he asked a guest host to fill in for him, and the guest host said, sure. Now, this guy, the guest host, is a broadcaster. And that was good. They're all set to do the broadcast. But prior to the broadcast, the guest host calls the engineer at the network and says, look, I want to change the introduction. The opening music, the opening theme. And I've got some audio clips to play, and I want you to get them, and I'll let you know when to play them. So the guest host starts the broadcast at the appropriate time with the replaced theme music, the introduction, and plays the clips, ask the engineer to play the clips. Now, I don't do that in terms of the clips. If I want to play an audio clip, I make sure that I'm not going to violate copyright, and I play it right here from my studio. Okay. The reason for doing that is I don't want to tie up the engineer, and I know what I'm going to say, and I know how I'm going to lead in, and I know how long it's going to take, and I can just move the dials right here. Okay. So my question for you, Rich Scheben, is what is your reaction to the guest host changing without notification or without permission the opening theme, intro, and music? What's your reaction to that? Now, you've been on both sides. You have guest hosted for me, and you're an instructor. You've been on both sides. What's your reaction?
Yeah, well, I've actually guest hosted for several people over the years, and I'll be honest with you, I just don't find the need to change the theme music because that's kind of an audio iconic representation of the heritage or tradition of that particular show. So I just don't feel the need to go there. And, of course, the first thing that came into my mind when you were discussing this was copyright laws and, someone playing a song that may have certain copyrights or patents on it, and someone playing that song for too long, and then all of a sudden there's litigation going on. So, personally, I just don't. I mean, technically, I can say I don't have a problem with it, but personally, I don't feel the obligation to do that as a guest, because there is a certain saying when in Rome, right? Do when you're in somebody else's home. You're not going to be comfortable and say walk around in your pajamas or something, right? You're going to eat with a fork. You're going to do certain things. I think it's the same premise works for when you're hosting a show, because somebody has certain trust or faith in whether it be your ability, your research, your reading, and your desire to keep the show a certain format, and that being theme music. So I would never do it. I don't. So I guess I'll just leave it there, Vince. I don't look at this as a big, huge topic, but I've never done it.
Here's why I brought it up. I think it is big, and I'll tell you why. So if Rush Limbaugh invites someone to fill in for him, he has a standard opening. It's what the audience is expecting, and it's the brand. It's the brand we're talking about. So the pajamas, going to somebody's house in pajamas, it's unacceptable. Using profanity in front of women at another person's house is unacceptable. Changing the theme music, to me, is unacceptable. If it were a business, it would be the equivalent of a guest manager, managing the store and covering up the sign and putting a different sign out there, for the day. To me, that's what it's like. And it's never occurred to me, because of the level of trust I have for USA Preparers, guest hosts like Rich Scheben and Guineith Isaacs and Captain John Regan, it's never occurred to me that you would try to do something like that. So when the host of this show asked me, Vinny, what would you do? Right out of the gate, I said, I'd fire him. He said, well, that's what I did. And that's what I would do, because I would say, what a breach of trust. Where does this person get off thinking that it could change the show? This is a guest host. It's not the new owner. It's not the new manager. It's not the new CEO. We're just talking about someone who is going to be filling in. And when someone fills in for Rush Limbaugh, within the first minute or two during the introduction, the person will say, yeah, I'm filling in for Rush Limbaugh, and what an honor it is to be filling in for Rush Limbaugh. Now, I'm not saying it's an honor to fill in for me. But what I am saying is there is a level of trust that I expect. And I'd fire that guy immediately. As a matter of fact, that's what he did. So the reason I wanted to mention this is because this is just a symptom of what's happening in every walk of life. It's me first. And I keep talking about me first. So where does someone get off taking liberties like that? You know, it's like worse than visiting someone and their house and redecorating the living room. Like moving the sofa, moving the chairs, the wall hangings, taking them off. Where does someone get off doing that? And I'm probably going to get a lot of trash on the internet about what I said, because this other guy who did this is a broadcaster, and I didn't mention his name. But it's outrageous to me. And as just because I heard this story and I believe this story, that guy would never be on as a guest host or an instructor or even a caller if I knew about it.
Oh, Vince, I got to tell you, we're being groomed for accepting and being tolerant for all this crap. Again, I told you I would never do it. I just don't feel the need to change the theme. But think about what the aristocracy is doing. They're calling for no due process. In other words, no burden of proof. It all depends on what group you're in. You know, the powers that be, they want to create the problems, the reactions, the solutions, and they want to manufacture everything. Basically, it's a big gaslighting exercise. So when you don't have due process, you detain people indefinitely, you eliminate citizens' rights, you create mass surveillance and censorship, secret wars, secret societies, secret courts, pedophilia running rampant, no accountability for elite groups, and we just allow power and the so-called official authorities and dubbed experts to basically do whatever they want to self-serve themselves, whether it be Congress, whether it be, eminent domain, taking people's land, personal gain and campaign contributions, lobbyists, special interests, PACs, government grants. It's all superseded now, free markets and supply and demand. So you have all this pork barrel spending, militarizing the police state. Basically, our alphabet agencies like the FBI, CIA, NSA, DOJ, owned by the highest bidder, antitrust monopolies, and the too big to fail and too big to jail, basically can do anything they want, take over the country, even sell out jobs to our so-called enemies, like in China. And Google, Facebook, Twitter, all the mainstream media, it's all owned, whether it be by China or the highest bidder, by the elite, controlling the narratives, creating distractions, dumbing down and dividing the people. It's all for the betterment of the aristocracy controlling and managing the serfs. So when you think of this little micro example that you just gave in talk radio, this has really been happening for years at the highest levels. Vince?
And the reason I mentioned it is because it is happening on talk radio, and it is happening everywhere else, and the goalposts are being moved for the worst. You can't do these kinds of things. There's etiquette involved, and we seem to have forgotten what etiquette is. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com, offgridmontana.com. We're talking about protocol, we're talking about etiquette, we're talking about breaches of trust, and what I'm seeing more often is carelessness everywhere we go. And carelessness is a breach of protocol. It's a breach of trust. It's a lack of integrity. And I was talking with the store manager at one of those huge box stores. I'll even tell you where it was. It was Sam's Club. And I mentioned to him that, hey, where did the big appliances go? Where'd the refrigerators go? Where'd the dishwashers go? Where'd the washers and dryers go? Where'd they go? You guys don't have them anymore. And he said, yeah, we don't. And he said, the reason that we don't have them is because of the amount of damage that they got. When they handled the appliances, they get banged up. And they'd lose money because they'd be damaged. Now, how's that possible? How is it possible to damage so many washers, dryers, refrigerators, freezers, dishwashers, that you can't make money doing it? How's that possible? Well, that's a result of carelessness. That's a result of not paying attention. So because they can't find, and this is my interpretation of it, because they can't find people who can handle appliances like other stores can, they stop carrying them. That's really sad, because I've got a washing machine that I bought from Sam's Club 20 years ago, and it's still working fine. I bought it in Virginia, used it for years, then brought it here, and I'm still using it. And I'm not looking forward to the day that that thing quits. But they can't have them because they lose money trying to sell washers and dryers and refrigerators and freezers, because they can't get people who can't bang them up. So what I mentioned with this very simple story about a broadcaster whose trust was breached by a guest is just symptomatic, just the tiniest tip of the iceberg. It's everywhere. It's carelessness when we get our cars serviced. It's carelessness at hospitals. It's carelessness everywhere. It's carelessness when the guy that cuts the lawn at that corporate site aims the discharge chute of his mower toward the road, and rocks go flying out and break windshields and side windows and rear windows. And that's what happened to me. Some jerk was mowing a corporate lawn near a parking lot, aimed his discharge chute toward the cars. A rock flew up and broke the rear window of my car. And it was a real pain in the neck to get him to admit that he did it. But I did. And he bought me a new rear windshield. And by the way, that's what it's called, a windshield, even though it's in the back. So, Rich, even I just wanted to let people know that it's getting worse. And I talked to the management at Sam's at many occasions, and I said, people in the parking lot are really getting dangerous. It's hard to cross the crosswalk there because you get run over, because the cars don't yield. The trucks don't yield. When I talk about trucks, I'm talking about pickup trucks. I'm talking about really important people driving these pushed-out pickup trucks. They'll push you out of the way. There is no regard for protocol. It's careless. It's reckless. And if the police are going to do anything, I'd like to see them give tickets for people who are pushing their way around with vehicles. Any thoughts before we move on, Rich?
Well, first of all, a lot of what you were talking about with the washers being damaged, it's not just the carelessness, it's also suboptimal products, if you will. Just like the video you sent me on how everything is, even new cars are using plastic parts that break or disintegrate in the sun or crack, and they're basically a disposable item now compared to the old metal cars of years ago. And you were talking about work. One of the first things that came to my mind, Vince, because we've talked about this in great detail and specificity for years, and that's the lowering of bars of standards and expectations for works, because this is what group identity politics has done. And I'm blue in the face saying that when you lower the bars of standards and expectations based on what group you're in for getting a job or keeping a job, that metastasizes like a cancer throughout all society. And I've given many examples of that. Basically, what the theme of your little rant should be is that the little people are now collateral damage. The little people are irrelevant.
Yeah. We'll be right back. Rich, it's not my fault. You used the term collateral damage. And I resent. This is not my fault. You said it.
Okay.
Well,
I had a funny feeling. I walked out of another rant on a plank there.
Yeah, you did. You hit my button. And it's amazing how this happens. I was thinking about this last night, and I was opening a can of soup, and I was like furious. Now, why was I furious opening a can of soup? I was the only one hungry at that time, and there was no one around in the house. It was just me. And so I got out a Revere saucepan and heated up this can of tomato soup. Well, I couldn't use a can opener because this dumb can has a pop top. And here I am, collateral damage. Why? Because those cans are great for nuts and bolts and screws, and I'd love to use them in the shop. And sometimes I put them over the exhaust pipes of the straight-up exhaust pipes of the tractors to keep the rain from running down. They're just a great size. But because of the GDP, because people don't know how to use can openers anymore, they have these pop-top cans with the sharp edges that you can cut yourself on. So I can't use them for reuse purposes. I have to throw them away. But it's not just that. It's the coffee cans. There used to be all metal coffee cans with, the 3-pound coffee cans or even the 1 pound. I used to use a can opener to open them up, and I could reuse those cans. No, can't do that anymore because the coffee cans have these rims that have these convenient peel-off aluminized seals, for the GDP that don't know how to use a can opener. So because of them, I am collateral damage. I can't reuse these cans. I would love to be able to use a 3-pound coffee can that I would open with a can opener. I'd love to be able to use that to drain oil from small equipment. Let's say little lawnmowers, four-wheelers, motorcycles, things like that. It's perfect size. But no, I can't because I can drain off into it, but I can't pour out of it because it's got this lip that's in the way because of the GDP, and they can't handle a can opener. So it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And some people might say, Vinny, you just don't know how to handle progress. Right. I don't know how to handle progress that is in the wrong direction. Like cans that can't be reused. And it costs me more because the new cans are harder to manufacture. They had to change the assembly line to make these new cans. The old cans were working great. As a matter of fact, you could store things much longer in the older cans because they were less likely to leak. They had better seals. Now we have these composite cans. And then you have the blue coffee canisters and the green ones and the red ones, Folgers and Maxwell House and decaffeinated. They're all plastic. And what do we do with them? Oh, that's easy. Just throw them in the ocean. That's all collateral damage, and I resent it. We could wash out our steel cans and recycle them. We could do that. But we don't. Rich?
Well, they say they do things like surveys and focus groups and all this stuff to get the opinion of the consumer on what direction they go for whatever reason, some of the reasons you stated just now. That has nothing to do with it. That's just smoke and mirrors, again, more gaslighting, more theater. It's about money. It's about, it's just like looking at bonds and credit ratings. It's all rigged. It's all rigged. Just like Hillary and the DNC had used foreign powers for spying, creating false reports, fake dossiers. Everything is phony today. Everything. The globalists / Democrats, because the globalists have taken over the Democrat Party, they've hijacked it, and I think everybody with an IQ higher than a chipmunk in the forest can see this. But they start with a phony conclusion, and then they make up fake narratives, and they build a made-up case, connect the dots undercover of something or behind the scenes, basically to funnel money from the little people to the elite. It's that addiction of power, money, and control. And then they use divide and conquer strategies against the people to keep us distracted against their crimes, so we are being poisoned against ourselves. Now, are there people waking up to all this? Absolutely. And we're here to help the wake-up process. Right, Vince?
Yeah, and since you've mentioned this, the markets are now betting on a the Fed rate cut. Goldman and UBS and some others don't agree. You had some great thoughts about changing the way we look at interest. If you look at auto sales, they're down. I got a thing in the mail, and it's one of these game show kind of advertisements, and you peel off the stickers, and I won a huge TV. But I don't think I did. And I'm not, even though I'm, supposedly I should be attracted to call this dealership, because all I have to do is go to the dealership and go pick up my huge TV that I don't want, don't need, I'm not interested in. I'm sure some people are interested. It says that I won. I won. But I'm sure everybody says they won. And I'm sure it's a scam, because they don't know what to do with all these cars that are piling up on the lots. So they're doing all kinds of risky things to try to entice people to go buy these new plastic junky cars. Get rid of their better ones that were made before to get one of these junky ones that's made now. So you had some great ideas about what we should do. What should happen to interest rates? And can you share that with us in a little detail this morning?
Yeah, you bet, Vince. I have so much information here. It's another economic 101 update, folks, but I'm going to mention a few articles right here, and you tell me if we're heading in the right direction for economic prosperity for the little people. Okay, first article. Adam Schiff, Trump has so isolated U.S. allies they don't want to join us in Iran response. Now, I think Trump is doing the right thing to find out if this is a false flag to create war, because the military-industrial complex / Democrats / globalists love war, love depopulation, and most of all make money from it against the little people. Next article, Putin sets the table to leave the dollar behind. Next article, are Microsoft and the Pentagon quietly hijacking U.S. elections? Basically, that means that high-tech, big tech, the censorship, surveillance, corrupt process is going to tell us that we don't have the right to vote anymore, because it'll be irrelevant. Next article, housing starts slide in May despite plunging rates. Next article, miracles are coming, surefire recession signals. Where this is today's article on Zero Hedge. Next article, I sent this to you, Vince, the other day, and we talked about this. $11.7 trillion in global negative yields, back to all-time high. So basically, what I want to talk about today, folks, and you've heard me talk about QE for the people, because here on USA Prepares, the people doesn't get representation, doesn't get rights, and doesn't even get restitution under the law. So I talk about, you've heard me talk about QE for the people, and in many different contexts, because the super wealthy, they're funding both sides of wars, NGOs, geoengineering, all the things we talk about. I'm trying to create or make an admission to the fact that we're in a deflationary, stagflationary environment, and that the elite are trying to manufacture phony inflation just out of thin air. It could be QE too, where the great majority of it goes to the top 1% to 2%. For the bailouts, too big to fail, too big to jail. Liquidity for the banks and Wall Street. It could be fractional reserve lending, where banks lend out way more than they have. It could be stock buybacks, which so many corporations have left the core business model. Instead of putting money into employees, products, and services, they're putting it into the CEO's pocket by artificially increasing stocks so the executives can benefit from those yields. So basically, everything that's being happening, and I've talked about this in great detail and specifics, is happening for the wealthy. It's welfare for the wealthy. Almost everybody is bought and paid for in this process. So what I'm trying to do is, I've been talking about this for probably, 5 years, Vince, at least? If we could...
Oh, sure.
Look at where we're going with the interest rates. Look at the bond market, the bond bull market. And I've talked about interest rates for years being a function of economic growth, wages, and inflation. And then you throw in our debt situation. You throw in, just look at corporate debt alone. This is a very conservative statement, folks. We have more than double the amount of corporate debt that sunk the stock market in 2008 because of the subprime housing market. We have more than this is a very conservative statement, more than double the leverage in corporate debt. And then we have, on top of it, $14 trillion in household debt. We have over $1 trillion in car loans, student loans, credit card loans. So what I am proposing is that the little people get bailed out through a QE program that instead of trying to fight this and create phony precedents, what we need to do is realize foreigners are not buying our debt. And if Americans no longer buy our debt, now keep in mind, we're supposed to be, our treasury market is supposed to be the less riskiest on the planet. So if no one buys it, interest rates are going to go up. The last thing we need is interest rates to go up, because whether it be interest in our debt, housing, auto, emerging markets, if the Fed printing press comes out with more QE and goes overtime, we're going to fill the bubble of this Ponzi scheme IOU, where the Fed gives digital credit to banks, and they buy debt, and the treasuries pay interest on debt, and then the Fed buys the bonds, gives interest payments back to the treasury for income for the government, and every middleman in between gets their nest feathered, and the cost shifting goes to the middle class and the little people. So the Federal Reserve could be the only buyer of treasuries, and that creates a round robin, if you will, of internal velocity of money, which is a Ponzi scheme. So the super wealthy keep funding malinvestments for the rich to keep their cash flow going. And I read too much about, should we save the stock market or save the bond market? Well, it's all phony. And with all the variable rate loans out there that the little people have, nobody can afford an increase in rates under a debt-backed system right now. Now, debt is typically deflationary in nature. And I talked about debt a few weeks ago. I talked about inflation and deflation. And I will get more specific after the break here. But I'm going to try and be as quick as possible and give as many bullet points as possible, Vince, after the break.
We'll be right back. Rich, you were talking about debt being inflationary in nature. Please continue.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. Well, folks, what we have is a system that literally bails out the super wealthy, gives welfare to the super wealthy, and funnels money from the middle class, especially, and the bottom 93% of income earners, and feeds everybody crumbs while malinvestments and basically anything the super wealthy want to do get to do. You know, look at all the banks that have been caught rigging all the markets over the years, the LIBOR, the Forex, silver, gold, treasuries, the VIX. No one goes to jail. And this is why these are the same people who vote for no due process, because they got to cover their crimes with distractions so that people can hate one another by a group. Okay? This is what, and we have to look at, let's look at the yield curve for a second, okay? Under normal conditions, short-term bonds should be yielding more than long-term bonds. Everybody knows that. Higher interest rate equals longer maturity. Banks need to borrow low and lend high, the spread gimmick, and higher rates for higher risks. We're all aware of that. But when you look at how unhealthy the economy is, even with all the market rigging, the bill note bond, the 30-day is now inverted with pretty much everything up to the 10-year yield, or the 10-year bill, or note, if you will. So it's pretty obvious that we're heading towards a recession. I think it can be papered over until after the election. But we have to, in the meantime, instead of doing gimmicks like MMT, Modern Monetary Theory, whatever they call it, UBI, Universal Basic Income, we can actually take this situation that I've been talking about for 5 years And if we lower the yields, the interest rates, we can not only save bonds, which is a much bigger market than the stock market, because the stock market only benefits the top 10% of the people. And if interest rates go up, that's another tool for artificial inflation. Then everything crashes. We talked about this: stocks, bonds, real estate, especially commercial and retail. Emerging markets, we can't even pay the interest on our debt. So if we lower the long end of the curve, okay, maybe even to zero, maybe even negative, like this last article I talked about, where $11.7 trillion of global debt is now negative yield. Maybe we can keep the short term higher, where people can make a little less riskier cash. If you want to even think that the U.S. Treasury is less risky with this Ponzi scheme that we've talked about for many, many years. But if we lowered the long end, let's say we put it into negative, instead of having delinquencies, defaults, bankruptcies, basically cost shifting to the already burdened middle class. You know, look at these gimmicks. You know, the Democrats are talking about loan forgiveness for college debt. Basically, that shows that there's no value because there's no supply and demand and free markets left. When these companies or colleges or healthcare agencies or we've talked about this with the inflation chart. When they get subsidized, when they're a special interest group, when they have big lobbyists and PACs, and they get the money printing, what do? They don't take that money and give it to the little guy consumer. Those costs and savings don't get transferred through products and services to the little guy. They literally go to the big guy, to the CEOs, to the CFOs, and they're using our money that we bail them out with. So ask yourself this question, folks. If government raised interest rates, cost of servicing debt would exceed tax revenue. If interest rates went up, could we even afford to service our debt? Because everybody's broke. The bottom 93% is broke. 80% of people living paycheck to paycheck. So who do you lend to in an environment where yield curves are inverting, which is code for the credit market collapsing? Who do you lend to? We can all see that qualities of assets to offer for collateral is going down in quality, big time. So if the bottom 93% is broke, we need to refinance the bottom 93% of people so they can borrow and spend again. And instead of sending them into bankruptcy and defaults and delinquencies and all this stuff, which is, again, cost shifting to the little guy, before this reset or revaluation or whatever terminology they use, before it destroys the middle class and the little guy, we have an opportunity to bring down the long end. Everybody refinances. Everybody. Okay, school, credit card, housing, everything. All the debt that maybe even margin debt. Why don't we do that? I think it's a good idea. And after the break, Vince, I'm going to finish up on this after the hard break, if you don't mind.
Sure. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com, offgridmontana.com. We'll be right back. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Rich Sheben's with us. Talking about QE for the little people. Rich, please continue.
Thank you, Vince. I have an article here right in front of you, folks. It says evidence that the U.S. economy could be plunging into a very deep recession, is rapidly mounting. This is on investmentwatchblog.com. I could come up every week with 2 hours of articles that show that things are slowing down, and not just in the U.S., but worldwide. And the reason why it's slowing down a little slower, if you will, in the U.S. is because we have the world reserve currency status. We can print at will. We have certain policies that give us a little bit more of a parachute to come down a little slower. But what I'm talking about here, folks, and I started before the break, is to talk about, I realize I'm trying to shortcut a lot of what I'm saying, but I'm trying to deliver a message and contact, which is a plan for the little people, which is to lower the long end of the yield curve. In fact, I've even read recently that Switzerland has a I'm suggesting it isn't gimmickry because we've lost supply and demand in free markets. What I'm trying to do is give a little bit of a parachute for the little people so they don't go off into bankruptcies, delinquencies, defaults, and just have a crappy quality of life. So if we can take that long end from the 10 to the 30 and bring it down to 0, even bring it into the negative column and let for a couple of years so the little people can catch up to admit to a deflationary, stagflationary environment, which we have, instead of making the elite turn this whole thing with MMT and universal basic income and all the welfare for the wealthy, QE, fractional reserve lending, stock buybacks, which I've talked about in great detail. Instead of doing that and turning us into a inflationary, stagflationary environment, let's give the little people a chance to catch up because they don't have any representation. And when you look at the average recession, folks, the average recession since probably the 1940s, we usually have to, once it's admitted to, the revisions are in, and they can't fudge the numbers anymore, they have to usually lower the interest rate, the Fed funds rate, the short-term rate, whatever you want to call it, and it doesn't matter because everything is rigged. People say, well, they can only change the Fed funds rate, not the long term. I call BS on that. I think everything is rigged. Everything. And we've talked about this in so much detail. And there's no consequences for these people when they rig it. Just like the LIBOR, the Forex, the silver, gold, treasuries, the VIX. We talked about all this stuff. Everything's been rigged, and nothing happens to these people. So I think they have a chance to help the little people, and they just don't want to do it. Now, when you look at every recession that's occurred since the 40s, they usually go down an average of 500 basis points. Okay? That's 5 inflation points. Now, these days, you're not hearing the word, interest rates. You're not hearing the word in interest rate or the code talk, the semantics, the professional wordsmithing in the unit of measure of interest rates much these days because there's been so much inversion between the short end and the long end. Again, everything from the 1 month to the 10-year has inverted. Now, if we can take that long end, we can really help the little people to refinance all this debt and get them out of the woods and have a decent life. So basis points is 100 basis points in one interest rate point. And I know 99% of this audience knows that. But I just wanted to make that clear. So going back to what I'm saying, where everything is collapsing, including credit markets. Well, if you're in a debt-backed system, credit is very important. So we're in a situation that we see lower quality being put forth for collateral. Well, that's not going to that's going to help collapse the whole system. So we need to help the bottom 93% of income earners to refinance. So borrowing and spending can be done again and not put people into bankruptcy and defaults and delinquencies, etc., because the cost shifting that occurs to the people who are upright is inflationary. Because the costs don't get absorbed by the companies, by big government. This is the fascist system that Donald Trump inherited. So all those cost shifting gets put on to the little people. And that's why there's an aristocracy, and that's why almost everybody else is turning into serfs. So if we don't offer incentives to lower debt, then no one will lend or borrow, because lending will be called high-risk speculation. In fact, I would label lending right now to the bottom 93% of Americans high-risk speculation. So if we bail out the people for a change instead of the bankers, of course there's going to have to be some restrictions on borrowing, like collateral, like get out of debt first before you buy something new. You know, if you have an auto loan, don't take the money you owe from the last vehicle to be absorbed into your new loan for your next vehicle. You know, that's a downhill slope that you can never recover from. not the little people. They can't handle that. So there's got to be some type of common sense, logical restrictions. But what we've been doing, America, we've been giving no accountability, sovereignty to banks and corporations over the people. Giving no accountability, sovereignty to the banks and corporations over the people. So we need, at least for a couple of years, a temporary mechanism to let costs and savings of products and services get transferred to the little guy consumer. So you don't hear this from the sanctioned top-down messaging from the mainstream media, the banks, politicians, lawyers, judges. They are all bought and paid for. They don't represent you. They don't represent this audience. They represent the elite. So, Vince, I know you're very literate in finance and economic situations. What's your opinion of lowering the interest rates, like Switzerland has, which has been the number one country to live in for many, many, many decades, which they got their 30-year yield curve in negative territory right now, I believe. I mean, why can't we do this to help the little people instead of having the little people go on the street creating more Hoover cities, which is occurring all over the nation? Vince?
Yeah, Hoovervilles. That's what they used to be called, Hoovervilles.
Mm-hmm.
These little Hoover cities. Well, let me say this. From my perspective, I'm extremely conservative. I'm allergic to debt. I'm allergic to borrowing money. I'm even allergic to owning stock in publicly traded companies because I don't believe any of the publicly released numbers. I don't believe any of that. I don't believe companies are doing well. I think the accountants are ruining this country. They are trying to trick investors into thinking that companies are doing way better than they are. For example, I've talked about Sears. You go into a Sears store and there are more employees than customers. When did that happen? It used to be that you would get in line to get waited on. Now, the employees are looking for someone to sell something to. Let me respond this way. There's an article in the Daily Mail. I'm looking at it right now. Headline: Scandal-prone bean counter, KPMG fined $40 million after staff cheat on ethics exams. The staff was found cheating on ethics exams, and they got illegal tip-offs about inspections. So here's what, let me just read this. This is just one more example of what's wrong. You can't trust those who are allegedly representing the little people. Now, KPMG is one of the big four accounting and advisory firms. What do? Well, they're involved in audits, auditing companies, assuring that the financial statements are correct. They provide tax preparation services for large companies. They provide management consulting. They're advisors to large companies. They provide actuarial services, and they also provide corporate and financial legal services. That's what the big four accounting companies do. So KPMG is one of the big four. They were fined $40 million because the staff, meaning the employees, cheated on ethics exams and were given illegal tip-offs about inspections by regulators. So the regulators are coming, the staff gets notified illegally. The accounting firm was hit with a penalty after the United States Securities and Exchange Commission uncovered a host of bad behavior. Accountants in the firm shared answers to the internal training exams. And these exams were meant to evaluate them based on their integrity and ethics. The staff hacked into websites used to carry out the tests to make the pass score lower, allowing the staff to get through the exams even if they had less than 25% of the answers correct on the exams. We're talking about one of the biggest accounting firms in the world cheating on ethics and integrity exams. How bad can it get? I think it's pretty bad. So
it's all bought and paid for, the whole system.
Yeah, and the point is, I'm not buying any of it. I don't want to be part of this. I will not own stock. I haven't owned stock for decades, and I majored in finance and economics. I have no stock, none. The only stock I have is what I can control, and they walk around on 4 legs, and they're black. I have black Angus cows. I got a few red ones, too. I have a few red Angus cows, but I don't know how they showed up. But, yeah, I don't own paper investments, and it's not even a paper investment anymore. What it is, it's a conceptual investment. And I will not allow the Finelli family to be fleeced by the accountants. And the accountants are popping up everywhere. Lying, cheating, misrepresenting. And companies that are run by accountants, I don't want to be any part of. So I guess the bottom line is pretty simple. You can't trust very many people, okay? And in the opening of this broadcast, I talked about one of my friends who's a broadcaster, and he trusted another radio broadcaster to be a guest host for him. And the guest host usurped authority and changed the intro music and in effect, looked like he tried to steal the show. A breach of ethics, a lapse of judgment, an outrage. And so that guest host got fired. Accountants lie with numbers. And how about this? Who would build a product that they know would fail? And they know when it would fail? Well, Volvo. Volvo built great automobiles. They weren't overall, they weren't always the best looking. They weren't the ones with the greatest fuel economy. But a Volvo was a solid 9. If you look at the appearance of it, if you look at the comfort of it, if you look at the safety of it, if you look at the engineering, it used to be a solid 9 all the way across, any way you looked at it. A great value. Well, they made a change, and they decided that they would create wiring harnesses. They would put insulation on the wires that would disintegrate all by itself. So you'd have a bundle of wires. The insulation would just flake off. You could just rub the wire between your fingers gently, and the insulation would fail. And 2 adjoining wires and maybe a bundle of 2, 5, 10, 20 wires, 50 wires, they would short. And the car would not run. And how much does it cost to replace a wiring harness? Oh, it's a huge job. Everything's connected with wires, from the taillights to the headlights and everything in between. And engine management systems, gauges, lights, idiot lights, the alternator, everything. So what happened? Well, people got sick of it. Volvo got sold to Ford. Ford couldn't handle it. Sold it to the Chinese. Volvo is now a Chinese car. I'm not kidding. BMW. They decided, heck, we don't need no metal in our cooling system. We'll go with plastic. So they have these flimsy plastic O-ring sealed tubes that pass the coolant at 207 degrees. That's what the thermostat in a BMW operates, 207 degrees. The parts get so hot and they get brittle and they crack. What cracks? Well, the coolant recovery tank. These hoses with these flimsy wires that hold these coolant flow tubes together just slip off. The cars overheat. What happens when the car overheats? The head warps. The engine's now past the point where it's economically viable to fix the engine because the cylinder head warped, which means you have to take the engine apart, you have to take the head off, you have to have the head milled, and you have to put it all back together. Thousands of dollars. So when that happens, people junk their cars. BMWs. How do I know? I've worked on 3 of them in the last 2 months. Every single one of them had a defective, failed coolant tank. They all overheated. All 3 of them overheated. If you go to rockauto.com and you look up 2000 BMW 528i and you look up the cooling system, they have bold areas of parts that are really popular, like oil filters would be a popular item for a car. Well, on a BMW, the coolant recovery tank is a popular item. Now think about that. How many have ever been replaced on a Chevrolet? You never hear of it. Because although Chevrolet's made a lot of mistakes, they haven't made that one yet. So, do I trust big companies? No. And you mentioned Microsoft. When you talk about Microsoft being involved in rigging elections or allegedly rigging elections, we're talking about treason. The minimum penalty for treason is 5 years in the clink. The maximum is death. And what I want to know is if our elections are being rigged by high-tech corporations, I want to know why charges of treason have not been levied. And I want to know why heads haven't rolled. When I say heads haven't been rolled, that's what happens at the guillotine. That's just to put an exclamation point on what Rich Sheben's talking about. We can't trust any big company, and I don't. I don't trust a single large corporation, not one. So, in 1998, there's a company called Waste Management. They reported $1.7 billion in fake earnings. Enron in 2001. The shareholders lost $74 billion. Hard to believe, right? So, thousands of employees and investors lost their retirement accounts, and many lost their jobs. WorldCom, the company is now MCI. They inflated their assets by $11 billion. 30,000 people lost their jobs. Investors lost $180 billion. 180. Tyco in 2002. That's a New Jersey-based blue-chip security systems company. The CEO and the CFO would be Chief Financial Officer. Like that would be the head bean counter, the head accountant at the company, at the corporation. Stole $150 million and inflated the company income by $500 million. HealthSouth. HealthSouth is a company that would rehab people. So if you're injured and you're released from the hospital and you need to be tuned up through rehabilitation services, HealthSouth was the largest publicly traded healthcare company in the United States. They allegedly inflated their earnings by $1.4 billion, $1.4 billion. Freddie Mac, 2003. $5 billion, $5 billion with a B, in earnings were misstated. American Insurance Group, that's AIG, in 2005, an accounting fraud of $3.9 billion was alleged. Bid rigging and stock price manipulation. Lehman Brothers, 2008, they hid over $50 billion in loans disguised as sales. Now, we are talking about some of the biggest names in corporate history, and these are massive, massive scandals. Then you've got Bernie Madoff in 2008. He fleeced investors out of $65 billion in the largest Ponzi scheme ever. That's just a few. But Scheben, I'm not willing to trust any large corporation, period, for anything.
Well, of course.
And it's not like my mom said, "Hey, Vinny, listen, don't trust corporations," or my dad said, "Vinny, don't trust corporations." I learned these things on my own. One last story, Rich, and then I'll sit back and lower my blood pressure. So when I worked for a Fortune 100 company, I would read the Wall Street Journal during my lunch hour, and I'd play the penny stock market, and I'd buy stock. And my salesman from Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith, would call me up and say, "Hey, Vinny, got a great stock tip for you. This oil company is going to go big, 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 big. Buy it now, buy it now. It's going to go big." And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about it. I need to read about it." Sure enough, that day it would go big. The next day, it would collapse. And I believe what happened, and I mentioned this to an insider, I said, I believe what happened is that the field offices of the investment bank, Merrill Lynch, would get a post in the morning. "Okay, all y'all, we're going to sell this oil company. You're going to sell it big. Pump it up, pump it up, pump it up. We already got our position in there. So if you want to get yours, get in before you call your customers. Drive the price up because tomorrow it's going to collapse because we're going to sell our big position." I think that's what happened. And I mentioned that to Bob Chapman, the great Bob Chapman. I said, "Bob, what do you think?" He said, "Absolutely. Absolutely, you're right." So I don't trust any accounting firm. I don't trust any corporation to do anything, especially for little people. So I'm going to sit back and relax.
Okay. All right. I'll get your blood pressure up just by saying a few things. But it's true. It's not just the accountants. It's the economists. It's the scientists. They're all rigged. All the numbers are rigged. Everybody's bought and paid for. It's basically swaying public opinion by the mainstream media. It's controlled by 5 or 6 companies. It's holding on to the narrative, the memes, talking points, microphone, etc. And it's creating forced obsolescence to move an economy. And when you look at some of the rigged numbers that they use for so-called GDP growth, just think about, I'm going to use the word stupid here, okay? And I know I've talked about this in great detail and specificity. I'm going to mention a few things over a few seconds that I've talked about for over hours over the years. But look at some of the calculations and unit of measures that have changed. And look at things like GDP. Somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 to $5 of debt increase for $1 of growth. Now, do you think for the bottom 93% that is a valid, legitimate, credible unit of measure? Hell no. It's to transfer money from the little people to the elite. How about unemployment? How can you say we have less than 4% unemployment when there's 100 million people unemployed? And people who are getting jobs and keeping jobs has nothing to do with hard work, effort, proven results, and qualifications. In fact, I will say this comment. Maybe it has a little bit to do with it, but I will say this. In the history of America, when our country really was great, that Donald Trump is trying to get great again, hard work, effort, proven results, and qualifications have never meant so little as they do today compared to hiring somebody because of some political correctness, what group they come from. There's absolutely no way group identity politics is going to make America successful. It's forced and invited U.S. companies to go abroad where you can't even tell a joke in the hallway without sensitivity training and attorneys and human resources coming out of the woodwork. So you give someone a job with less proven as results and less qualifications where you don't have restitution, rights, protection under the law. Basically, that shows that the people in the hierarchy are bought and paid for. This is eliminated opportunity and given opportunity for people who choose to play the victim group status card because they feel entitled to ask to lower the bars of standards and expectations for a job. While at the same time, those dumb people really think that the elite are trying to help them while they're bringing in robotics, automation, and artificial intelligence to take their job. While the elite use Keynesian economics, the when in doubt, inflate routine, while the elite eliminate mentor-protege relationships, kicking fathers of the home so there's no discipline or tough love, to foment hate and divide and conquer strategies, while the middle class is literally being sacrificed and eliminated right in front of our eyes. Folks, this is why I talk about Economics 101, is so people will be curious enough to read up on the things that we talk about, so you can realize how the wool is being pulled over your eyes under the guise of, oh, this is better for you and for the common good. It's just the opposite. It's just like the central bank system. Their job is to save the banks, save the stock market and Wall Street, and maintain the status quo. And as they do this, they're not just maintaining the status quo. They are fortifying a caste system, which means that you will always be as poor as you are. And when you look at the units of measures of despair, which we've talked about in great detail, drug use, suicides, obesity, so many things, we're going in the wrong direction. And that's what this show is about. It's to stick up for the little guy, because the little guy has no restitution under the law. I tried to contact 30 attorneys. Not one, I couldn't hire one, because they told me as a poor/middle-class white male heterosexual with a Christian name, I had no group self-pity points. Does that sound like America, the land of the free and the home of the brave to you? Does that sound like the land of opportunity to you? And we have to say these things because no one sticks up for us. We have no rule of law in America. We have rule of group. And this is why I need to mention the 3 criteria about standing for principle. Some of you might not like it, but this is what we need if we want to be successful and have any ounce of prosperity and control our own destiny, even a little bit. And that is 3 criteria. First is the same rules, laws, and accountability. And I hear people talking about all these subsets, ethics, morals, values, and policies, and accountability. Who knows how many thousands of definitions that has? It means nothing, because it's totally different for what group you're in, based on skin pigmentation, based on gender, or whatever gender you identify as, what sexual orientation, what religion. They're even trying to divide generations, and I've brought that to light many years ago. Second is truth. Why would you listen to this program? Why would you go to college? Why would you listen to any program if all our intentions were to entertain you and blow smoke up your ass? What is the purpose of going to college, going to school, going to public school? As you can see, the light at the end of the tunnel is getting more and more dim. And of course, third might be the most important criteria about standing for principle. If someone else has less consequences for their behavior because of what group they come from, and that is race, gender, sex, religion, ideology, the whole works, then you get to do it too. And if you don't like that, then let's practice what you preach laws. Folks, aren't you tired of being told what to do, what to say, how to think, who to do it with, what time to do it, where to be, where to live, everything, by people who are literally bought and paid for, who are telling you what to do and how to live, but they're not doing it themselves. Like all these greenies, all these elitists who fly around in jets all the time, often private jets, and they talk about greenhouse gases, carbon footprints. I live off-grid here. My carbon footprint is probably 1/10 of what the average American is. And these super elite who tell you how to live, their carbon footprint is probably 10 million times what you listeners do on a daily basis. We'll be right back after the break.
On Friday, I plan to talk about some of the tips from my book, How to Do Things the Way I Do Them. And if you'd like to share some of your tips, things that you've learned in your life, you'd like to be on the air, you give us a call on Friday. I'll give out that number on Friday. If you're an instructor and you want to share yours, give me a call. All the instructors have my phone number, so you can call me and let me know if you want to join me for an hour or two on Friday. That's this Friday. Rich Scheben, please continue.
Well, I couldn't go on this track for many hours, Vince, but, we've really been lied to, the people, the U.S. workforce. The U.S. economy is designed for the very elite, and that's why I talk about Economic 101, so people can understand what's going on, so they have a chance to create dialogue, to talk about this, to wake people up and possibly change some things. We have companies that have literally sold out the American people with technology, and they reap the economic benefits from it. We have technology that's purging data, book burning, that have basically the treasonous class. Treason, racketeering, censoring speech, rights, freedoms, justice, espionage. They're basically buying so many people and too many things. So we have a very small
Hold on one
group.
second. Rich, hold on one second. You said book burning. Here's an example of that. You hit one of my buttons. So the public libraries go out and they buy hardcover books. And they have what's called library bindings. Library bindings are extra heavy-duty bindings. So they cost more than just a regular hardcover book that, we might buy. Okay? So what do the libraries do with these books? They decide that, we're going to sell them. And they sell them for 25 cents. They have these book sale-a-thons, annually, and they dump books. They dump perfectly good books. They stamp them with 2 words, library discard. And they stamp them on the inside. They stamp them on the side of the book where you can see the edge of all the pages. They stamp them with these rubber stamps, library discard. So everybody knows that you don't have a stolen book. You bought one from the library. They discarded it, but they charged 25 cents for it. But it probably cost $20 or 30 or 40 or 50. That's book burning to me. And in England, when there was a fuel shortage and energy prices went way up just a few years ago, people were burning books for heat. Heck, you could buy a book for $0.25, or you could buy some wood for 50 cents. Hey, let's use the books. That's what happened. You hit the nail right on the head when you talked about book burning. I just wanted to make sure that we gave a concrete example of what book burning is. Please continue.
Well, we have the treasonous class that have bought and paid for certain government officials, mainstream media, academia, and this has created a rigged system. It's turned the little people into a caste system, and this whole system invests in certain markets, and whether it be equities or whatever, and widens the wealth inequality. And, I've done shows, Vince, as you know, and I haven't done it in a long time. Maybe I should, next time I get the chance to monologue, when you have things to do, maybe I should talk about ideas and solutions. I know I've done plenty of shows just on that. They're very politically incorrect, but I get good feedback. One example is citizen review boards, overseeing everything, public forums everywhere. See, if President Trump would take some of the suggestions that we give, just like when I talked about today, instead of trying to fight the end of an economic cycle, if we would admit to a deflationary, stagflationary environment, which we are in, instead of manufacturing inflation and literally getting the long end of the yield curve down so all the little people who have debt, and especially leverage from corporate America, can refinance this. And of course, like I mentioned, there's got to be restrictions. I shortcut a lot of things because I just don't have the time to go into huge detail because there just isn't. It just isn't. I can discuss what I talked about today for probably 5 shows, and there just isn't enough time. So I shortcut a lot of things. But I try to do it in the context that makes the message deliverable, but mostly gives a benefit and relief to the little people who has no representation for anything in this country anymore, depending on what group you come from, of course. Vince?
Okay, the salient point is citizen review boards. Class, you need to sit in on all kinds of meetings. You need to go to school board meetings and just watch and start asking questions. You need to go to court and just be a court watcher and watch what happens. You won't believe it. You won't believe it when the judge says, Joe, you've been here 27 times for driving without a license. What are we going to do with you? It doesn't seem to work when we lock you up. We don't know what to do. You'll see those kinds of things over and over.